Okay, so I'm now at section 2 of this first lecture of Tepper, and this is speaking Greek. This is the bit of the background. I just showed you a piece of Trojan women, and because the sack of Troy was, well, because the Trojan War is so important, it appears multiply from different authors from different points of view, just the way that we have represented the Vietnam War, World Wars One and Two. It's not as though you get a story about World War One. There is an agreed general narrative. I mean, people, historians left and right, pacifists and militarists in general agree on the events, basic events. After that, the interpretation begins, and okay, after that, it's all a fight. It's all a fight after that. So it's not a surprise that we're going to have the Trojan War from the Greeks' point of view, the Iliad, the Trojan War after the Trojan War from the Trojans, no longer Trojans' point of view, the Aeneid, and so on. One of Euripides' plays, so these are plays which were written basically in the 5th century or so, BCE, before the Common Era. I think that's 5th century. Is that right? Yeah. Yeah, it's basically, this is the Greek. This is the Renaissance, right? I wasn't talking about it in this course. Okay. Anyway, this is where we get the Enlightenment from. This is where people talk about how bad the Enlightenment is. Like, this is where it started, right? And if the Enlightenment doesn't mean anything to you, no problem. That's okay. Just let it pass. Like a fish in the night. one of Euripides' plays, Euripides, Sophocles, Eumenides, all very famous Greek playwrights. And Euripides wrote a play about Iphigenia, and it's about Agamemnon's fleet, and he's about to sail to Troy to take back Helen. So Agamemnon raises a fleet of 1,000 ships. Like, this is the face that launched 1,000 ships. So it's Helen's face is so beautiful that 1,000 ships launch out and start rowing, rowing and sailing to get to Troy. Okay, but the fleet is becalmed, and there's no wind blowing, which means they can't get there, by the goddess Artemis, who demands of Agamemnon a sacrifice. And Agamemnon's like, sure, yeah, you need a sacrifice? What do you want? Like 5 goats? Like, we'll do it. And Artemis is like, your daughter, sacrifice your daughter, Iphigenia. And Agamemnon's like, great. Gets his men to bring Iphigenia to him, and he says, I've got bad news and I've got worse news. Jesus. And he lures Iphigenia initially to Aulis, with the promise that she will be able to marry Achilles, who is the Greek champion, because he's partly a god. And so she's like, okay, well, I'm good. She's not so much interested in Achilles as she's very dutiful, and this is the point. I mean, this is the moral of this particular story, is that she is a dutiful daughter, and the play is a discussion about duty. What do you owe the state? So Iphigenia shows up, and they're like, actually, it's not so much a marriage as it's a funeral, and it's your funeral. And she's like, what? No way. But she has to agree. And so she pleads with her father not to kill her. And this is a brutal scene in Iphigenia and Aulis. It's just wrenching. And but then he finally explains, okay, this is the problem. I can't get the breeze to blow until Artemis wants a sacrifice. She wants you, and that's our job, is to kill you to make Artemis happy, and then the breeze will start up. And but it has to be a willing sacrifice. So when Iphigenia hears this, she then goes away to think about it, basically. And this is a problem. I mean, tragedies usually turn on problems. This is the problem, that Iphigenia must decide what is her job essentially in life. Is her job to be a sacrifice? What is her duty to the state? What is her duty to the father? Her filial duty, and so on. And so she agrees to the sacrifice. So they kill Iphigenia, right? And Artemis starts the wind blowing, and the ships sail, and they get to Troy, and the war begins. So why this background? Why the Greek landscape? Is Tepper suggesting, for instance, that Stavia has to be sacrificed by Morgo? Because it's a discussion about mothers and daughters, right? I mean, so is Morgo here a sort of Agamemnon-like figure? Well, no, because Morgo is not. They are making war to control the garrisons. You know, they have these very limited wars. And interestingly enough, it's almost exactly what Victor Davis Hanson wanted, right, from the 300. It's close combat with no throwing weapons. That is, no distance weapons, ballastra, bows, etc. It's all spears and swords. No powder at all, no explosives. And they don't give them steel, right? So it's all bronze, or iron, really. So it's soft, relatively less useful metal. It's not very refined metal that they've got left over, right? So what's the background? Why is this the background? What is this Greek landscape doing here? Does Stavia have to accept, for instance, that she is a sacrifice in some way for women's country, and that she has to meditate on her value to the state? What why is she valuable? Is she valuable because she can have children? Is she what is it about her that makes her valuable? She's bright, okay. So what is the new world that they wish to sail to? Because the point about Troy is that they're going to go to Troy and they're going to bring back Helen, who essentially means their good luck for Germany. Jeez, this is interesting, for Greece. So in the play that Tepper's characters reenact, and this is the background you need to know, is closer to the Trojan Women, which I showed you a piece of, where the brutal cost, essentially, of the Trojan War is shown when Troy falls. And in this play, Hecuba and Cassandra is the one who sees all the bad things that are going to happen ahead of time. And she keeps saying, oh, we're going to all be killed. And people are like, oh, Cassandra, shut up. And then it comes true, and they're like, oh, Jesus. So they don't want to hear from Cassandra, but at the same time, she's always right. And so people will sometimes say, oh, don't be a Cassandra. You don't really hear this much anymore. Yeah, I did have a student once who was named Cassie, and I said, are you a Cassandra? And she said, yeah, I actually am. And I was like, wow, okay, that's quite the name your mother gave you. And she's like, I know, but people didn't know it. So I was like, so do you always have bad news? She's like, let us not talk about it. So it's quite funny. So anyway, Hecuba and Cassandra and Andromache are enslaved by the Greeks at the end, and Andromache's baby Astyanax is thrown from the walls, and so on. Part of the reason that Tepper constantly reflects the Greek tradition back to us is that it's on this tradition and these narratives that the definitions of beauty, law, justice, education, and statehood, remember all that stuff that we just heard from Miller? Tepper's after the same stuff, because she says, well, this is where the patriarchy begins for us. If you're looking for the origin story of the patriarchy apart from the Bible, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, which is really the Greco-Roman Judeo-Christian tradition, it's here. Like, this is it. So all of these things, I mean, to paraphrase Trotsky, a famous Russian member of the Russian Revolution, who was unfortunately killed, assassinated. It's too bad, because Trotsky was sort of one of the, well, we can always say this about the people who got killed when they were young, that Trotsky was no Stalin, let's put it that way. But anyway, Trotsky said famously, you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. And the same thing is true with Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey. You may not be interested in the Iliad and the Odyssey, but they are interested in you. And they, in the same way that the Bible is a steady undercurrent in the narratives of of goodness, justice, what the rules are. These are the rule books. So let's have a look at some new Greeks. What do the new Greeks look like? It's like, well, they look like this. Here you go.
Okay, 378. 66. Hey!
Motherfucker! Come on, let him up! Oh, fucking kill you, son of a bitch!
Damn it, Nick! Get this guy under control, will you? Settle him down!
Devil. Now, son, who's that?
Saint Michael.
Who is it?
Saint Michael.
And what did he do?
He cast Satan out of paradise.
Good boy.
The Holy Spirit in your spine and the love of the Blessed Virgin in your heart.
Okay. So what I want you to get from these two little clips is that we still have, and this is the part of the point about Suzanne Collins, Hunger Games, however many books she's cranked out by now, but the trilogy, at least the first trilogy, is that they are. The point is essentially how much of the state now is Roman. How much of it is the theater of cruelty, and where you use distractions basically to keep people's mind off, not only off their sufferings, but off the fact that you've taken everything away from them that is really valuable. So they're living these sort of mean lives. By mean, I don't mean that they're nasty to each other, but that they're lives that are thin and are empty, largely, of a joy, pleasure, And I don't mean pleasure like sexual pleasure, but I mean sort of satisfaction, contentment, happiness, I suppose, if you want to use that word. Well, what do we do? It's like, well, football. And it's very interesting to see how much people feel their lives have sort of come unglued because there basically hasn't been sports for a year now. And it's just the desperation. I mean, people are just, well, you have to have sports. And it's like, yeah, okay, because sports is one of the central places for making meaning, for making good and bad, for defining what excellence is, for giving you a local thing that you can grab a hold on. I mean, people say, "Oh, I'm proud of being Canadian." It's like, what does that mean exactly? Like, oh, maple syrup, it's the RCMP, it's like, oh, I don't know. But if you say, who's your team? They're like, oh, this and that, and I saw so-and-so play for, and they know about the sports. So sports are incredibly important in making people connect to the local and feel pride of place and that they are part of a community of fans. It's enormously important. So sports is a problem. And then the connection between sports, I sort of went from Any Given Sunday, where you've got this really smart film about the out and out sort of blood sport of football by Oliver Stone, the same guy who made Platoon, right? And Gangs of New York, another great filmmaker, Martin Scorsese, where Scorsese takes, it's like the standard, it was understood in the gangs in the 1860s in New York, that they would get out and have these brawls, and whoever won, I mean, people killed each other, and that was it. I mean, you might or might not survive these battles. And they established essentially the social order. So does football establish a social order? Well, tell me it doesn't. Explain to me how it doesn't. So that was my point there. So by basing her text in Greek myth, Tepper uses all the irony available to her to attack not only the patriarchy, but the male concept of honor and war. Everything the 300 was about, which is why we're doing this now, so you can see, it's like, here's 300, and here is a critique of exactly this mindset. So you can, it's like, aha, so if 300, if you looked at 300 and you thought, what is this? I can't stand this. It's like, oh, no problem. Tepper is your person, right? It also gives her text the kind of cultural clout that it needs to be taken seriously by critics, and it really worked too. And so, for instance, when Michael lifts his kid and yells, "Warriors, behold my son!" and there was a wild outcry from the warriors, a hullabaloo of shouts and cries, slowing us into a steady, bottomless chant, Telemachus, 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 on 15 to 16. Well, we've seen this before, and the hilarious thing about it is that everybody thinks, it's just the usual thing about, how we all, I think it's sort of guaranteed that every MIT professor is going to, at some point in their, in a lecture course, is going to trash Disney. Here is that moment. So here Telemachus is the son that Odysseus leaves behind. And of course he starts off as a boy, but then over 11 years he grows to be a young man. And he protects Odysseus' wife and his mother, Penelope, from the predatorial suitors who have come. So the Trojans are all like, actually, no, not the Trojans, pardon me, the Greeks who haven't gone to war. That's right. So they're all coming around. They're like, well, it's Odysseus is dead. He's not going to come back. You should marry us. And Penelope's like, it's fine. I'll be doing my weaving. And she weaves every night. Every day she does weaving. And every night she undoes the embroidery. I have to look that up. But I think it's embroidery, and every day she undoes part of it so that she's moving very, very slowly. She says, when this is done, I'll choose a suitor. And then, of course, Odysseus comes home, and he and Telemachus kill everybody, of course, except for Penelope. And the moral of the story is, have sons. That should sound familiar to you. Like, here, check this out, from Grandpa Disney. Here you go. Okay, so I adore the fact that Americans who say they hate royalty, they don't want kings and queens, love Disney, and they love the fact that in just about every Disney film, there's a princess or there's a prince or both, royalty, something. I haven't seen one Disney film where at the end they're like, and now we're going to establish a democracy. You never see that. That's so funny. Oh God! It's like now we're actually going to, one person, one vote, and all the women are going to get to vote too. Doesn't happen. Oh yeah, no, it's going to be a monarchy. One of the great strengths of Tepper's text is that it does not paint simple villains and heroes. Chernin is we see him, he's not you don't like him, but he's not also wholly bad. He's a young man. He's been trained essentially by these masculineness in the garrison. But on page 306, he's still wondering. He says, why? Why didn't Odysseus say how the women felt, how they looked? Why didn't any of the sagas talk about that? So even, this late in the game, Chernin is like, we're missing this part of the story here. There's been a missing story all along in the Enlightenment from these points on, basically, where the story of the women, the other half of the population, which men's record to date shows very few things about. I mean, the story of science has been the story of men doing science, not the story of women doing it. Partly because men have prevented women from doing science, and so on. So men can always fall back on but women haven't done da da da. It's like, well, guess who stopped them? Okay.